secret families. Quote, "It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." Henry Ford in 1922. According to legend, the Illuminati are a small, super-secret cabal of influential individuals who have shaped the course of world events for the last 250 years. Continual generations of these secret families and societies driving the world agenda have been known by many names. This global elite is composed of the richest and most powerful people in the world. The existence of a global elite is not disputed, but what is their agenda? Leaked reports confirm that they consistently meet throughout the world behind closed doors to discuss their agenda, the control and domination of all facets of society. Then, like clockwork, their plans appear in the media, finance, corporate, government, commercial, and military arenas. It is said that the Illuminati are the masterminds, the power behind the throne, who actually control world affairs through clever alliances with governments and ownership of corporations. They are then effectively positioned to establish a one world monetary and governmental system. The word Illuminati means people claiming to be unusually enlightened with regard to a subject, or any of various groups claiming special religious enlightenment. Like the definitions imply, any group which considers itself enlightened could rightfully call itself the Illuminati. Indeed, there is a benevolent group that does exist, and they also go by the name the Illuminati. They are actually the original group using the name. They have been working behind the scenes for a very long time to help humanity free themselves from the chains we have been stuck in for thousands of years. So the term can be confusing because it has been hijacked and adopted by forces at the opposite end of the enlightened spectrum. The Illuminati we are discussing here is not a benevolent group who want to create peace and harmony in the world by helping to bring freedom and justice to the people. Rather, they are the shadowy powers that be, self-serving puppet masters running the show by using war, destruction, and poverty, and to control the populace through ignorance and fear. They infiltrated the true freedom movement in an early stage by adopting the term Illuminati to describe themselves, thus co-opting the name of the original benevolent group. This is yet another method to further confuse the matter and throw truth seekers off their path. Similarly, this second group has confused researchers by using the intrinsically benevolent term New World Order for their negative and malevolent goals of world domination. Gaining control of the money supply was an early tactic. The first international bankers were the Knights Templar, a secretive society created and sponsored by an even more secret society known as the Priory of Sion during the time of the Christian Crusades. At that time, the goal was to recapture the Holy Land from Muslim control. Associated with the Illuminati is the Bilderberg Group, with a direct lineage to the Venetian black nobility, a cabal of rich trading families in Italy 800 years ago. Behind today's Bilderberg Group is a contemporary network of powerful private merchant banking interests based on a medieval Venetian financier oligarchic model known as fondi. The ancestors of today's ultra-wealthy families who belong to the modern Bilderberg Group were responsible for the creation of the synarchism movement of empires. This is an ancient cabal whose aim was forging political alliances between financiers and industrialists in order to unify socialists and anarchists around fascist principles. And in this way, they have controlled humanity through violence, propaganda, and bribery for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. These people earned the title of black nobility for their ruthless lack of scruples. They employed murder, rape, kidnapping, assassination, blackmail, robbery, and all manner of deceit on a grand scale, and allowed no opposition to the attainment of their objectives. Synarchism International was founded by the Esoteric Secret Society of Freemasonry in the 1770s as a counterattack on the principles on which the United States was founded. Call them what you are, the Synarchists, the Priori de Sion, the Illuminati, or the Bilderbergs, who were named for the Dutch hotel where they first met. One thing is true, these elite groups do exist. Today, these elite families and groups all have immense wealth, and money is their means of power. The British and Dutch East India companies and the Bilderbergers are examples of the private merchant banker alliances. To find out who the people are who head the Bilderbergers, one can find the names of top cabal members within the membership of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. This inner core of people are also called the Inkukbala. Today, there are basically 1,000 top members of this cabal, and they make all the big decisions that influence a great majority of people on Earth. The ruling bloodlines. One is always born into a ruling bloodline family, never a walk-in, even by marriage. One cannot just join the family. Beginning in the 5th century CE, Mergovian nut kings, the black nobility, and royal families have exclusively interbred. The royal bloodlines are likely much older, spanning the course of recorded history, and perhaps go all the way back to the ancient Egyptians. Members can only be born or incarnated into the family lineages. Family members are brought up in a very specific and rigorous way, which engenders unwavering loyalty. No matter how keen and sincere another may be to join, the families only place trust in those individuals they have sired since early childhood. The secret ruling bloodline families will always intermarry between lines or between houses. Marriages are always arranged. There are no unapproved unions, and it is unthinkable for a family member to break this code. They do as they are told. The whole familial house society is geared towards upward progression. The agenda is handed down from generation to generation. Only on rare occasions have outsiders been invested into the family, and even these were from other esoterically integral lines. The most prominent Illuminati family bloodlines, those whose individual family members wield vast control over the world, include Rothschild, Rockefeller, Astor, Bundy, Collins, DuPont, Freeman, Kennedy, Lee, Onassis, Reynolds, Russell, Van Dunn, Disney, Krupp, Bush, and the McDonald bloodline. One family, one bloodline, one rule. According to the World Bank, only 227 families own 47% of the world's wealth. And this is a conservative estimate. According to the Financial Times, 10 families control much of Israel. That leaves only 217 elite families to control worldwide banking and industry, along with the purse strings to directly influence lawmakers. These power brokers refer to themselves as the hidden hands, the nameless individuals that are directly involved in most of the institutions on earth. How can a market be free when members of the same family get to print the money, lend it to our government, and charge the people a usury fee in the form of interest and income taxes? The ultra rich are so rich that they're even richer than some small nations. The master of all is the House of Rothschild, the wealthiest family in the world for the last 3 centuries running. According to financial insider Benjamin Fulford, the Illuminati are really inbred families of European and North American traditional aristocracy and banking families. They control the USA, England, Europe, except for Scandinavian countries, Germany and Italy. Italy kicked them out in the 1970s. Japan, Africa, Canada, and Mexico. They do not control China, Russia. Putin kicked them out for the first time since 1917. India, Southeast Asia, South America, Cuba, etc. Their goal is to create a world government. Until 2010, the plan was the New World Order that was precisely outlined in the Project for a New American Century. However, with the debacle in Iraq, the secret government of the West changed to a new plan that is the world government based on the EU. To do this, they will sabotage the US economy. Rise of the Khazars. In 1976, after many years of research, a well-respected Ashkenazi Jewish author named Arthur Koestler published a book titled The 13th Tribe, in which he affirms that most Eastern European Jews are neither Israelis nor Semites, but rather Khazars, Moguls, and Huns by ancestry. In making his case, Koestler quotes a 1,000-year-old Arabian manuscript declaring the Khazars and their king are all Jews, and that Gog and Magog mentioned in the biblical book of Revelations are the Khazars. The Khazars were talented entrepreneurs and money managers. They became monopolistic world merchants throughout the 13th to 18th centuries. They were re-exporters of foreign goods, middlemen, inspectors of trade, goldsmiths, and silversmiths. For their services, they exacted a 10% tax or a tithe on all trades. These Jews became international masters of precious metals, minting gold and silver coins, and established themselves as royal treasurers, tax collectors, and then the primary money lenders of Europe. Their principal source of income was foreign trade and the levying of customs dues. These families practiced communal living, an early version of communism. They viewed themselves as a separate group, having maintained their identity over millennia by means of strong racial awareness, strict intermarriage laws, conscientious religious practices, and loyalty to tradition. Thanks to the research of Koestler, it is easy to follow the origins of the Khazarian international banker families from the year 1400 CE to the present day. It shows the Khazar bloodlines links to Spain and Portugal, such as the Marinos of Spain and the Gurets and Marques of France. These international merchants established trade links with India, China, and many other lucrative international markets. According to industrialist automaker Henry Ford's 1920 book, The International Jew, Khazar Jews financed the voyage of Christopher Columbus with the goal of finding a more direct route to the continent of India. Until his dying day, Columbus believed that North America was India and wrongfully named the American native tribes Indians. Henry Ford writes, "The story of the Jews in America begins with Christopher Columbus. On August 2nd, 1492, more than 300,000 Jews were expelled from Spain, and on August 3rd, the next day, Columbus set sail for the West, taking a group of Jews with him." The fact that these early banking families happen to be Jewish is likely one of the feeders of anti-Semitism. Any human group that accumulates great wealth is resented and is therefore vulnerable to misuse of such wealth. This is not a Jewish trait, but a human one. Many accounts, such as that of Henry Ford, enumerating the cabal and the history of Jews, carries an undercurrent of anti-Semitism. The truth is unbridled wealth and power is the problem, not exclusively the group's ethnicity. The first known Illuminati order, called Alumbrado, was founded in 1492 by Spanish Jews called the Marranos. With violent persecution in Spain and Portugal beginning in 1391, hundreds of thousands of Jews were forced to convert to the faith of the Roman Catholic Church. Publicly, they were now Roman Catholics, but secretly, they practiced Judaism and retained their Khazar customs. The powerful and extremely wealthy Marranos were able to secretly teach their children about Judaism, particularly the Talmud and the Kabbalah. After 1540, many Marranos opted to migrate to England, Holland, France, and to the Ottoman Empire and what is today Turkey, also Brazil and other places in South and Central America. The Marranos kept strong family ties and became very wealthy and influential in the nations where they resettled. As is the custom with all Khazar people, it did not matter in what nation they lived. Their loyalty was to themselves and to Judaism. In more recent times, the Khazars have become known as Zionists, and their loyalties reside with the nation of Israel. Europe's Illuminati. Today, the Illuminati primarily control world affairs from locations in Europe. Although they never used that name, today's ruling bloodline families are a modern incarnation or continuation of various earlier European Illuminati groups. The most famous are the Bavarian Illuminati, founded on May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, who was born in 1748 of Jewish parents, but grew up in the Catholic faith. He was a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law and well-versed in the occult. To his followers, Weishaupt outlined the top 5 secret means to achieve their goals as follows. First, monetary and sexual bribery would be used against men already in high places. 2, the Illuminati, who were on the faculties of top universities, would recruit candidates to work for them. 3, influential people would be placed behind the ranks of government, religious, and financial institutions, and be used as agents for the Illuminati. 4, the secret society would attain complete control of the mass media. 5, they would implement covert military coups to remove any governments opposed to their planetary rule. Weishaupt soon infiltrated the Continental Order of Freemasons, and with the Illuminati doctrine established the lodges of the Grand Orient to become their secret headquarters. The Illuminati philosophy has spread and is followed within Masonic lodges worldwide. The public translation of the Illuminati is intellectually inspired. But Weishaupt himself said in private that the word was derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light. The beginning of the massive Rothschild's private empire can be traced back to Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who arranged a secret meeting with other powerful families 3 years before he employed Weishaupt. The financiers of the older Illuminati orders, dating back to the bankers during the times of the Knights Templar, financed the early kings in Europe, who eventually created the Bavarian Illuminati. Weishaupt was merely a gopher who did their bidding. It was Weishaupt who termed their cause a New World Order. The symbol of the group is printed on the back of a US $1 bill, a mystical, unfinished pyramid with an all-seeing eye reigning above the world. This private empire soon came under the financial control of Mayer Amschel Rothschild. The Rothschilds Illuminati. The Rothschilds are the most eminent banking family in history. In the 19th century, they lent money to kings and governments and funded both sides in the Napoleonic Wars. At one point in time, the Rothschilds saved the Bank of England from collapse with their own money. But how did they acquire such astonishing wealth? The Rothschilds claim that they are Jewish, but a more accurate ethnicity lineage would be to identify them as Khazars, as discussed above. They are from a country originally called Khazaria that occupied a region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and which is predominantly occupied today by the country of Georgia. They are part Mongol because Genghis Khan and his army occupied the region for many years. The reason the Rothschilds claim to be Jewish is that the Khazar people, under the instruction of their king, converted to the Jewish faith in the 8th century. About 85% of the people of the world today who call themselves Jews are actually Khazars, who prefer to be known as Ashkenazi Jews. The Rothschild rise to financial dominance began when Mayer Amschel Rothschild was operating a finance house in Frankfurt, Germany. His 5 sons were dispatched throughout Europe in the late 1700s and early 1800s. The 5 sons set up operations in Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, and Paris, and soon created a true European financial dynasty that is still hugely dominant today. In June of 1815, Nathan Rothschild secret courier network was the first to make it back to London with news that Napoleon's French troops had been defeated by the British alliance of 7 nations at Waterloo. Rothschild, who had funded both sides in the war, cunningly alleged that the French had won and started selling British consols on the stock exchange. Other traders fell for the bluff and the market plummeted. Nathan Rothschild then quietly started buying up everything in sight. And by the time the real news of Britain's success in the battle reached the public in London, the House of Rothschild had assumed control of the British economy. According to the meticulous research of Eustace Mullins in 1985, in this one single engineering panic maneuver, Nathan Rothschild expanded his fortune by a staggering factor of 6,500 times. He destroyed the British economy by making the entire market think Napoleon won at Waterloo. In one single day of trading, Nathan Rothschild did what Napoleon could never do. He conquered Great Britain. The official biography of the family, published in 1962, called the Rothschilds, boasted of the family's achievements. Quote, Mayer Amschel's 5 incredible sons conquered the world more thoroughly, more cunningly, and more lastingly than all the Caesars before or all the Hitlers after them, end quote. The five sons essentially became the world's first modern multinational corporation. The creation of the Federal Reserve. The Rothschilds' influence soon spread to America as well. By the mid-1800s, the family dominated the banking industry, joining other dynasties such as Morgans, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, and Cecil Rhodes. The Rothschilds financed the House of Morgan and sent associate Paul Wahlberg, a partner in Kuhn Loeb and Company, to meet with other private bankers on Jekyll Island in 1910 to secretly draft the Federal Reserve Act, which was passed in 1913 under false pretenses. This allowed bankers to control and create 90% of the U.S. money supply and loan it out at interest, a surefire way to be highly profitable and influential while also allowing private bankers to run the national economy. It is also revealing that in the same year the Federal Reserve came into existence, the Internal Revenue Service was also established. On February 3rd, 1913, Wyoming ratified the 16th Amendment, providing the three-quarter majority of the states necessary to amend the Constitution. The 16th Amendment gave Congress the authority to enact an income tax. The Federal Reserve Act passed on December 23, 1913. The way the bankers convinced Woodrow Wilson and members of Congress to ratify the Federal Reserve Act was to create artificial panics in the stock market in the decades prior. After all, this single most effective way to make money and secure control is to stage a mass panic, as Nathan Rothschild proved so profitably after Waterloo. That was the lesson. If everyone sells and you know exactly the right moment to buy, you can achieve near limitless wealth and power. It is no surprise to learn that the House of Rothschild continues to wield tremendous power and control in the 21st century, though virtually always behind the scenes. Researcher Dean Henderson, in his book, The Federal Reserve Cartel, estimates the Rothschild fortune today could exceed 100 trillion. Yet, based on figures provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, the purchasing power of the dollar has declined more than 95% since the creation of the Federal Reserve, all the while bringing massive enrichment to the Rothschilds, who are based out of Europe. $1 US in 1913 is the equivalent of $22.92 in 2011. The exact value marking the decline of the dollar's purchasing power since 1913 is 95.6%. Of course, we could never know the true value of the House of Rothschild. Being privately held partnerships, the family houses never need to, and never have, published a single public balance sheet or any other report related to their financial condition. The Rothschilds are very influential and were influential in creating the country of Israel. It began when a proposition was put to Lord Balfour before the end of World War I to deed a piece of land for the Jewish Zionist Federation. This helped ensure that the United States would enter the conflict. A large portion of the African country Uganda was discussed as a new homeland, but was rejected by the Zionists. They insisted on Palestine. As the Great War dragged on, the British War Cabinet had no other option, so they wrote a letter of request and a promise to Lord Rothschild that they would carve up Palestine and give the Jewish people a new home. That little piece of land, in an official enactment by the United Nations, became known as Israel shortly after World War II. The Rothschilds continue to play a significant role in the funding of Israel's government infrastructure. Dorothy D. Rothschild financially supported the creation of a new Israeli Supreme Court building. The all-seeing eye oversees the Supreme Court complex in Israel, designed and funded entirely by the Rothschilds. While we cannot blame everything askew with our financial system on the house of Rothschilds, neither can we lose sight of the power they represent in nearly all countries in the world. Having a controlling interest in nearly all central banks allows an influence so supreme it can even make or break small nations. The Rothschilds family has been nothing less than masterful in enacting their plans. We might not approve of their tactics, but they are really quite ingenious. They waited very patiently for the right time to make big geopolitical plays, knowing they might never even see the effect in their own lifetimes. No one wants a Luciferian New World Order, not even some of their own members. Humans are all wired to crave freedom, even to the point of dying for it if necessary. The technologies they have suppressed make any and all of their arguments about overpopulation irrelevant. If one factors in the information known about the secret space program, then we are more than capable of migrating extra humans off planet. The point is that their money has been spent on fake media, creating fake fear, and promoting fake divisions between countries. Neo-Illuminati manipulation. The present-day influence of the Illuminati remains shadowy. Critics will say there is no evidence to suggest that the Illuminati society even exists, much less that it could be the most powerful organization on Earth. Although early on, the Illuminati was established to take over the world. Then they went silent during the end of the 1700s and early 1800s. The same is true with the Freemasons. The Masons are indeed a secret society, but it does not mean that they are planning to take over the world. But the maze of alleged sinister influences persist. For example, the Committee of 300, which is said to control the United Nations, appear to have strong black nobility connections. The Committee of 300 evolved out of the British East India Company's Council of 300, which was founded in 1727 by the British aristocracy. The House of Windsor, specifically Queen Elizabeth II, is the head of the Committee of 300. These historical connections strongly suggest that the new generation of Illuminati members of the various orders control the World Bank and other global financial centers. Consequently, they covertly dictate world oil prices and can manipulate markets and control the global Federal Reserve banking system. Each Western government has the legal right to coin their own money, yet they don't, choosing instead to borrow from their own Federal Reserve. Every person in the Western world has to pay taxes that go right into the pockets of the people who run the privately owned Federal Reserve banking system. It is one big privately run scam. Once again, when you control the money supply, you control the government. And when you control the government, you control the people. The modern day Illuminati, however, is now only a European and American entity. It consists mainly of the G5 countries of Germany, France, Britain, Italy, and the United States. Of those in the United States, only 1 in 1,000 people, or the 1% as articulated by the Occupy movement, are part of this group. And immensely powerful international organization called the Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, is the central bank of all central banks, and it secretly controls the money supply of the entire globe. Their headquarters is in Basel, Switzerland, but it also has branches in Hong Kong and Mexico City. The BIS is essentially an unelected, unaccountable central bank of the world that has complete immunity from taxation and from national laws. Sadly, only a very small percentage of people actually know what the Bank for International Settlements is, and even fewer people are aware of the global economy meetings that take place in Basel on a bi-monthly basis. No staff members are allowed into these meetings, and they are conducted in an atmosphere of absolute secrecy. The elite meet in private to allocate money and influence and to consolidate power for their own benefit. Their roster and timing of known meetings shows the consistent pattern behind this agenda, and occasionally leaked information confirms it, such as the late Jim Tucker's Bilderberg diary. The attendees are the people at the top of the pyramids of banking, media, military, intelligence, government, education, corporations, and organized religions, or their agents. As a result of their meetings, an experienced eye can begin to see the desired stories, candidates, coups, wars, and market moves appearing through the tentacles of the networks they command. For the puppet masters who seek absolute control of political individuals and institutions, their methods go even beyond lobbying, bribery, and threats of violence. Part of their modus operandi appears to be the systematic compromising of politicians with drugs, honey-trapped sexual affairs, and even child sexual abuse. Once such behaviors are established, they are then used as dirt to control politicians with threats of disclosure. The Illuminati in America. The government behind the government invokes the veil of national security. The highest levels of all these societies belong to the most elite club within government, called Cosmic Top Secret. This is the highest classification of NATO. Their covert operational arm is the CIA, which can discredit, assassinate, or make dissenters disappear, all under the guise of national security. But very few people know who these shadowy deep state forces are. As Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter observed in 1952, quote, "The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes," end quote. Indeed, the infamous Yale secret society Skull and Bones uses secret symbols operating out of a foreboding building called the Tomb. George W. Bush, his father, his grandfather, and John Kerry are just a few of their most prominent members. While officially supporting democracy, in reality, the elite secret families espouse a kind of benevolent dictatorship or enlightened oligarchy by those such as themselves who they believe have earned the right to know and make decisions in the best interest of civilization. They strongly feel that the ordinary person, being lazy and easily distracted, is not motivated or qualified to contribute usefully. They think the average American cares more about the Super Bowl than about life elsewhere in the universe. So why should they share the elite secret knowledge? This is business after all. The intellectual mentors of this powerful group are more like Sun Tzu and Machiavelli than Aristotle and Jefferson. The most elite of the elite groups belongs to the Rothschild and Rockefeller families, who control all the oil and suppress alternative energy technology, especially free energy devices. JP Morgan, although individually wealthy and influential, was a shill for Rothschild, and he stole Nikola Tesla's inventions and technologies. Tesla gave us alternative current, hydroelectric dams, and a plan to provide the world with free energy. But to the cabal, free energy could not be allowed, and eventually Tesla was financially destroyed by these powerful men. Although J.P. Morgan died one of the wealthiest Americans, he was a mere lieutenant to the Rothschilds. Tesla died broke. The capital of the Illuminati empire is the Vatican City in Rome. This is not to say all Catholics are Illuminati or vice versa. However, the Freemasons and the Illuminati are hand in glove. But again, not all Freemasons are Illuminists. Yet, the Masonic Temple at Alexandria, Virginia, is the center in the Washington, D.C. area for Illuminati scholarship and teaching. All Illuminati involved in the mid and upper levels of society have been groomed their entire lives for their adult roles. They are the movers and shakers behind the scenes. Indeed, the 1% of the 1% elite. It takes a lifetime of training and trust to reach the highest levels. The first thing a child learns from the family, or the order as they are called, is the first rule of the order is secrecy. The J.P. Morgan cancer. J.P. Morgan was the front man for the Rothschilds around the turn of the 20th century. He had a history of profiting from crises, mainly currency devaluations and the stock market crashes that he helped orchestrate. In both banking panics of 1893 and 1907, he intervened in created the illusion of economic stability while consolidating wealth for his company. J.P. Morgan has also been implicated in having his agents plant a bomb aboard the Titanic and disguise the explosion as an iceberg strike. He was supposed to be aboard for the maiden journey to discuss the creation of the Federal Reserve with its biggest American detractors, but he canceled at the last minute. The leading critics were silenced on April 15, 1912, and in the next year, the Federal Reserve was established. J.P. Morgan also benefited enormously from the Great Depression. When Black Thursday hit in 1929, he bought up all cheap stocks to keep the economy afloat. While people endured extreme hardship, J.P. Morgan walked away with significant financial gains. In 1917, congressional records show that J.P. Morgan interests hired 12 high-ranking news managers in the United States. He wanted to know how many news organizations it would take to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. The newsmen found that it was imperative only to control 25 of the greatest newspapers. An agreement was reached, the policy of the papers was bought, and an editor was placed at each paper to ensure that all published information was in keeping with the new policy. After the 25 most influential newspapers were owned and controlled, it was now possible to dictate editorial policy. The congressional record also indicates that an editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers. The policy also included the suppression of everything in opposition to the wishes of the interests served. Once that editorial board was controlled by J.P. Morgan appointees, he could influence the other newspapers. The first founding president of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, was John W. Davis, who was not only a millionaire, but he was the personal attorney for J.P. Morgan. And it was he who founded the secretive policymaking board. The Council on Foreign Relations maintains a mission statement to increase America's understanding of the world. However, the actual objective of this highly exclusive club is revealed by the insiders themselves. In the early 1960s, a Georgetown researcher, Professor Carol Quigley, was allowed to examine the confidential papers of the CFR and other secret documents. He discovered their real mission was, quote, to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole, controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. End quote. This objective is remarkably similar to the goal of the present-day Wall Street interests. Pursuant to their goals, these forces are in fact intentionally seeking the financial destruction of the United States as a republic, while embezzling vast sums from the public for their pending, planned, and near future fascist central government and bank. We must recognize that these same fascist forces conducted a coup d'etat with the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. Along with obscuring vital details of the assassination, such as many reports of a second gunman on the grassy knoll, there was also an urgency to maintain and cover up their World War II Nazi connections and treasons. This decision had become an urgent necessity after JFK's removal of Allen Dulles as CIA director. Dulles was also a major collaborator who was placed in the CIA specifically to maintain the Nazi connection cover-up. His removal by JFK prompted an urgent assassination to preclude the exposure of the Rockefellers, Harrimans, and Dulleses. The Council on Foreign Relations played an important role in funding the Nazis in the 1930s and until the beginning of World War II. Thus, it became necessary to orchestrate the JFK assassination investigation to prevent their connections from being made public. Plausible deniability was a term first coined by the CIA during the Kennedy administration. It is a term used to describe the withholding of information from senior officials in order to protect them from repercussions in the event that illegal or unpopular activities by the CIA become public knowledge. Does the lack of evidence make the denial plausible, meaning that it then becomes credible? Is plausible deniability a tactic used by the CIA today? It is also known that the CIA is the enforcement arm of the CFR. The evidence points to Wall Street and the Council on Foreign Relations, who not only funded, but arguably created the Nazi war machine in World War II and supported the post-war Nazi International, which continues operating in the shadows up to and through this day. In the 21st century, the Council on Foreign Relations continues its quest for global domination as it seeks quiet and total control of the world's financial and governmental systems. The CFR members include America's wealthiest tycoons, as well as highly placed elite in government, academic institutions, tax-exempt foundations, and established media heads. They preside over a far-reaching consolidation of mass media, overseeing and approving media mergers favorable to their mission. The approximately 4,000 members of the CFR are the real government behind the government. The CFR does not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the USA. They are also instrumental in creating that policy with their recommendations. Former Congressman John Rarick observed in 1971, quote, "The Council on Foreign Relations is the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of government to apply pressure from above, but it also announces and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below to justify the high-level decisions for converting the U.S. from a sovereign constitutional republic into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship." End quote. Today, Morgan's legacy lives on in J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup. These two banking powerhouses are suspected of being largely responsible for the 2008 economic housing collapse. They were well aware of their destructive behavior, but did nothing to stop it. In the end, these too big to fail banks were bailed out with taxpayer debt and gained huge profits while their competitors went under and people lost their homes, jobs, and retirement funds. This was no accident, but instead another intentional power and money grab, as it has happened throughout the course of history. The same strategies continue. Take it from Senator Dick Durbin, who commented in 2009, quote, "The banks are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill, and they, frankly, own the place," end quote. The Rockefeller cabal. The Industrial Revolution developed and empowered not only mechanized products and production of mass production for a mass society, it also had the nefarious outcome of making the captains of industry extraordinarily rich. The first billionaire in America was John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil. He was known to have revolutionized the petroleum industry, horizontally integrating his transportation network with the rail industry, bought out his competitors, and then went on to totally dominate the oil industry. His famous quote was, "Competition is sin." The Supreme Court ruled in 1913 that his trust originated in illegal monopoly practices and ordered it to be broken up into 32 new companies. Except for Pennzoil, all of the largest oil companies that were broken up remain today under new names. Continental Oil became part of ConocoPhillips. Standard of Indiana became Amoco, which is now part of BP. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Esso, and later ExxonMobil. Standard of New York became Mobil, now part of ExxonMobil. And Standard of Ohio became Sohio, now part of BP. ExxonMobil is currently the most profitable company in the world, with 4 out of the 6 super majors in the oil industry. That is BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and ConocoPhillips. Direct Rockefeller spinoffs. One Rockefeller Standard Oil partner was Edward Harkness, whose family came to control Chemical Bank. In the insurance business, the Rockefellers control Metropolitan Life, Equitable Life, Prudential, and New York Life. Rockefeller banks control 25% of all assets of the 50 largest U.S. commercial banks and 30% of all assets of the 50 largest insurance companies. Companies under Rockefeller controlling interests not only include the largest oil companies such as ExxonMobil, Chevron, Texaco, BP Amoco, and Marathon Oil, but they also control Freeport McMoran, Quaker Oats, Ascaraco, United, Delta, Northwest, ITT, International Harvester, Xerox, Boeing, Westinghouse, Hewlett-Packard, Honeywell, International Paper, Pfizer, Motorola, Monsanto, Union Carbide, and General Foods. 5 U.S. oil companies made over $37 billion in profit in the first quarter of 2011. Chevron is one of the 4 largest oil companies in the world, yet these oil companies lobby for and receive tax credits. It is no wonder that Chevron is the most important contributor to all political parties and lobbies the White House's strategic plans so that they meet the company's interests. Or maybe it's the other way around. There is a reason why Chevron sponsored studies that encouraged the invasion of Iraq before taking control of its oiled fields. Adjusting for inflation, John D. Rockefeller is often regarded as the richest person in history. Certainly, Mr. Rockefeller and his descendants would have a vested interest in the continued profitability of the petroleum industry. Their family legacy is that they managed their wealth very well. The end result is that the Rockefeller oil companies are among the most profitable corporations on the planet. These companies wield enormous power, political clout, and can even summon their own standing armies if necessary. They are extraordinarily profitable, many with a GDP that is equal to or higher than the GDP of many small countries. John D. Rockefeller was the billionaire of all billionaires, proportionally far richer than Bill Gates is today. He knew how to get what he wanted, and no governmental body would ever stand in his way. It was said that John D. Rockefeller had done everything to the Pennsylvania state legislature except refine it like his oil. The legislatures were literally owned by the corporations, and they even picked their state senators during the Industrial Revolution. Over 100 years ago, state senates already were owned by corporations. These were the first to fall under the spell of the ultra-rich. Rockefeller's spectacular oil profits ultimately allowed him to be in a position to essentially buy the United States government via his stake in the Federal Reserve with its magical ability to print money out of thin air. With the control of the money came a tremendous amount of power, not only in oil and government, but in virtually every sector of society. Much of the family's wealth has been funneled through philanthropic organizations such as the Rockefeller Foundation. Contributions and funding from the Rockefeller Foundation may look good on the surface. However, the control that comes from it is vast. For example, the current medical model originated with the Rockefellers around the turn of the century remains in place today. In the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller set up the Institute for Medical Research that laid the foundation for health research and development. Then, in 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation became one of the largest financiers of medical research. They handpicked scientists and doctors who were considered worthy of funding and placed a heavy emphasis on pharmacology. This allopathic drug treatment paradigm was carried over into the universities, many of which are still funded or were initially established by the Rockefeller Foundation. In this way, drug-based medical treatment has become the norm in America. David Rockefeller, the youngest son of John D. Rockefeller Jr., admitted in his 2002 book Memoirs to his family's involvement in a secret cabal, although conveniently dodging the alleged meaning of their one world vision. And I quote, For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for their inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. David Rockefeller had his 6th successful heart transplant at the age of 99. He died in 2017. Meet the Bilderbergers. The Bilderberg Group, or Bilderberg Conference, is an unofficial annual invitation-only conference of around 130 guests, most of whom are persons of influence in the field of business, media, and politics. The Bilderberg Group was the brainchild of members of the Rothschild and Rockefeller dynasties on the one hand, and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands on the other. These annual meetings of the North American and European elites began in September 1954 and took their name from the hotel in which the first meeting was held, the Bilderberg Hotel near Arnhem, Netherlands. This elite group continues to meet annually at luxury hotels or resorts throughout the world, normally in Europe, and once every 4 years in the United States or Canada, depending on important national elections. Their head office is located in Leiden, South Holland, Netherlands. Bilderberg co-founder Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands royalty represented more than just a member of the European nobility and more than just a major stockholder in Royal Dutch Shell. He was also a Nazi SS officer and a senior manager for the vastly powerful and notorious German chemical cartel IG Farben. Less than a decade after World War II, the Nazi financial and corporate interests that he represented were awash with a tremendous amount of cash that needed not only to be laundered, but to be safely lifted out of reach of the prying eyes of the American and British Treasury agents intent on shutting down the post-war Nazi international cabal by seizing its ill-gotten booty. Yet those who could launder such vast amounts of money and those who stood to profit from having it deposited in their banks were also able to use the cash to substantially expand their ledger credit entries. These were the international bankers in New York and London. It was inevitable that these two groups, whose essential political and economic philosophy, called corporate fascism, and who have political aims of global domination that are one and the same, should meet secretly and create a common cause. First, it is important to understand that the Bilderbergers are not a secret society. It would be incorrect to think of them as an evil all-seeing eye or a Jewish Masonic conspiracy. There is no conspiracy, just power broker secrets, even though many might see these meetings as such. These people see themselves as power brokers who make the decisions that make the world go round. If they didn't do it, someone else would. Critics say the Bilderberg Group promotes the careers of politicians whose views are representative of the interests of multinational corporations and at the expense of democracy. The group's secretive meetings and their powerful connections have provided fodder for many who believe that the group is part of a conspiracy to create a new world order. Because they represent the world's most powerful financial institutions and thus the most predatory financial interests, they are easily regarded as a formidable enemy of humanity's enlightened interests of freedom, privacy, and democratic representation. As evidence, there were once nation states in Europe
with their own constitutions, national flags, and national currencies that are now subordinate to the master currency, the euro. The US dollar also carries tremendous weight around the world, especially in its role as the petrodollar. Control the money, and you not only control the people, but also their democratically elected government officials, those who are always beholden to campaign contributions. The Bilderberg organization remains dynamic in that it changes with the times, absorbs and creates new parts, and while excreting the remains of its decaying parts. Members come and go, but the system itself has not changed. It is a self-perpetuating system, a virtual spider web of interlocked financial, political, economic, and industrial interests. Who attends the annual Bilderberg meetings? Attendees include central bankers, defense experts, mass media press barons, government ministers, prime ministers, royalty, international financiers, and political leaders primarily from Europe and North America. Also, some of the Western world's leading financiers and foreign policy strategists attend Bilderberg conferences. Donald Rumsfeld is an active Bilderberger, as is Peter Sutherland from Ireland, a former European Union commissioner and chairman of Goldman Sachs and of British Petroleum. Rumsfeld and Sutherland served together in the year 2000 on the board of the Swedish-Swiss engineering company ABB. Former U.S. Deputy Defense Secretary and former World Bank head Paul Wolfowitz is also a member. The old NATO alliance participants are involved, 50 to 60 top multinational CEOs, American senators and congressmen, plus many former European politicians and most of the Western European royalty, seated presidents and prime minister, Canadian and European commissioners, and the leading bankers who control the IMF, World Bank, and European Central Bank attend the meetings. Leading representatives of the largest world media companies attend, but surprisingly, never report on the event. Some key global decisions are made at Bilderberg meetings. The Bilderberg Group can orchestrate oil and other commodity prices. Russia and China know of the group but do not participate and are thus regarded as enemies. The most alarming aspect of the Bilderbergers is their grip on U.S. elected officials and other top politicians around the world. The most prominent politicians, many of whom have higher political aspirations, attend the meetings, compete for their favors, and demonstrate their willingness to enable the Bilderbergs to control important aspects of their countries. Meetings of private elite and government officials is illegal. American attendees of the Bilderberg Conference are in violation of the Logan Act every time they meet in secret for official business. The Logan Act is a United States federal law that forbids unauthorized citizens from negotiating with foreign governments. The text of the act is broad and is addressed at any attempt of a U.S. citizen to conduct foreign relations without authority. It was passed in 1799, last amended in 1994, and clearly states, quote, any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who, without authority of the United States, directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof, with intent to influence the measure or conduct of any foreign government or of any officer or agent thereof in relation to any disputes or controversies within the United States, or to defeat the measures of the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both, end quote. Violation of the Logan Act is a felony, yet there is no record of any convictions or even a single prosecution under the Logan Act. A similar private meeting of a select group, including top government officials, is held in Northern California every July. The Bohemian Grove is a privately owned 2,700-acre compound in Monte Rio, California, and surrounded by enormous old-growth redwood trees. Once a year, it plays host to a bizarre confab attended by some of the most powerful people in the world, including many U.S. politicians and business representatives. Participants embroil themselves in a heady mixture of plutocratic plotting and occult pagan ritual ceremonies. The most bizarre Bohemian Grove ceremony is called the Cremation of Care, and it takes place in front of a massive statue of an owl, the mascot and logo of the Bohemian Club. On this evening, attendees all wear hooded robes, and the ceremony is replete with fire displays and reenactments of sacrifices, which suggest those in attendance should not care or be compassionate for those sacrificed. In clear violation of the Logan Act, important political and business deals are discussed and established at the Bohemian Grove, even though it is unethical for any government official to meet with CEOs of large companies, military contractors, NGOs, and foreign government representatives without the transparency and direct consent of the people. Nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. America's biggest threat is not terrorists. Instead, as outlined in this chapter, our greatest threat is the empire constructed by secret families and their firm grip on the world's assets. For those still in doubt, let's quote some of those who have been the leaders of the Federal Reserve. According to Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, quote, "The Federal Reserve is an independent agency. There is no other agency of government that can overrule the actions that we take," end quote. When asked by a reporter what the proper relationship between the president and the chairman of the Federal Reserve should be, Greenspan said, "When these relationships don't frankly matter." Or Henry Kissinger speaking in 1973 on behalf of the Council on Foreign Relations, "Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls the money can control the world. Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac." Let's not forget former Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke responding to audit questioning by Congressman John Duncan. He said, "My concern about the legislation is that if the GAO is auditing not only the operational aspects of the programs and the details of the programs, but making judgments about our policy decisions, it would effectively be a takeover of policy by the Congress, and such a repudiation of the Federal Reserve would be highly destructive to the stability of the financial system, the dollar, and our national economic situation," end quote. The brunt of Bernanke's statement is nothing short of a direct threat to back off from an audit of the Federal Reserve by elected representatives, or else the economy collapses. The chairman clearly implies that any attempt to restore monetary powers constitutionally granted to the Congress would be seen as a takeover, and that the defense and repudiated Federal Reserve would respond destructively. The open use of financial terrorism Bernanke illustrated while under oath testifying before Congress shows clearly the Fed's contempt for constitutional authority. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. Still seem far-fetched? To summarize the hard facts once again, the U.S. government borrows money from a private corporation using the name federal and prints United States on the paper notes, and then it pays back interest to the Federal Reserve, which is money that comes from taxpayers. This group prints Federal Reserve notes and loans them out to the United States Treasury. American taxpayers then pay interest to the Federal Reserve banking families for the right to use their money. By controlling the debt, the Federal Reserve controls the politicians. When we look at the president, we must understand there is another force behind him. In short, the U.S. government is not run by our elected officials. The government does not represent the people any longer, but serves the corporations. Politicians are not actually elected. First, they are selected, based largely on their allegiance to the ruling elite, and then are funded to run for election. Of course, Donald Trump would be the exception to this rule because he funded his own election. It must be noted that the Founding Fathers recognized the political threat of the monetary system being taken over by private ownership. Thomas Jefferson said, "I sincerely believe the banking institutions have the issuing powers of money, are more dangerous to liberty than standing armies." Of course, the Founding Fathers added provisions to prevent this kind of takeover in the U.S. Constitution. It states quite clearly that Congress will retain the constitutional power over money. It says in the Constitution, the Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Just the opposite has occurred. The international and central banking systems are, at their very core, designed to concentrate wealth in the hands of a very few and enslave the rest of us within the burden of ever-increasing interest payments on debt. Global world domination. Finally, one of the most alarming trends is the financial cabal pushing to phase out cash and national currencies and then create a one world centralized bank using only electronic currency. If the United States ever does give up the US dollar, it will be a massive blow to our national sovereignty and a complete capitulation to the financial controllers. On the international level, the central banking elite have put huge organizations in place to implement their policies, including the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. The IMF serves as a sort of lender of last resort to developing or struggling countries. Its stated goal is to alleviate poverty. However, many countries that have received IMF loans are now buried in debt, unable to even pay back the interest due. The World Bank, like the IMF, also issues structural adjustment loans that place restrictions on how money can be spent. These structural adjustment loans mostly benefit transnational corporations. To implement the endgame of total global domination, first and foremost, the world B powers must control the money, and they do. That is why a one currency system in the hands would be a disaster. These power brokers also need to control energy, and they do. They violently suppress free energy because, as J.P. Morgan lamented, you cannot put a meter on free. These powers already dominate food and water with their ownership of agribusiness and world trade, and they are now buying up water rights around the world. They have widely popular health remedies in their pockets, and they actively suppress natural healing alternatives. They have enormous control over pharmaceuticals, medical schools, and research funding. Naturally, they would have to control the information through indoctrination. Therefore, they also control the most powerful media outlets and have a hand in compulsory, standardized education. What then is left? The internet is currently not controlled or fully censored, but there are many attempts designed to control the flow of information. In order to control dissent, Congress passed double-speak laws like the Patriot Act, which is very unpatriotic and seeks to strip away our rights. Watch out, you're on a surveillance camera and about to be scanned for your implanted RFID chip. In 2011, news reported that an RFID tracking chip capable of killing humans has already been invented. What could a human killing chip be used for? Perhaps not complying with rogue government demands? George Orwell's worst nightmare is happening right before our eyes. Big Brother is not coming, he's already here. We are already living within the matrix. So how do we get out? Our democracy has been severely threatened before. A very brief reminder of the recent history of exercising our rights will be helpful. Restoring democracy. There has been a growing tension in the United States between the moneyed interests and the idealism that created our democracy, the first democracy in the modern age. At the time of the Civil War, there were 6 democracies in the world. Today, there are 120, and most have been inspired by the American model. The USA represents a model for human beings to govern themselves with institutions of justice, in part by the creation of an informed public among its citizens. Contributing to an informed public is one of the goals of this series, but freedom is never cheap. During the Gilded Age of the Industrial Revolutions in the 1880s and 1890s, we almost lost our democracy in this country. This was the advent of enormous companies, or trusts as they were called. The captains of industry who ran the railroad, steel, oil, and sugar interests became fabulously wealthy. With their wealth, they became extremely influential. Many of the most pressing problems of our time relate to unbridled pursuit of profits without regard for human rights or the environment. Again, a glaring and dramatic example is John D. Rockefeller. Among the several presidents in his pocket was Warren G. Harding, commonly regarded as the worst president in the United States history. In 1921, there were union strikes in West Virginia in which some 10,000 union workers demanded more pay and better working conditions. Harding ordered the military to drop bombs and poison gas on the protesters. Harding was extremely corrupt and deeply in the pockets of the coal industry. Harding's final indignity was a bribery incident over petroleum reserves called the Teapot Dome Scandal that came to light after he died in office. This illustrates how corrupting money and politics can be, and why campaign donation reform proposed by President Donald Trump is needed, or better yet, how urgent it is to eliminate corporate political donations altogether. Nearly 100 years ago, it looked as if the Constitution was subverted, and we had completely lost our democracy. It was only restored because a few courageous journalists did what so few do today. Ida Tarbell, Upton Sinclair, and others started identifying the grave dangers we were facing. George Orwell famously wrote, "Journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations." By informing the public and inspiring outrage and indignation, these brave journalists of the last century were able to expose these dark forces. And then a man took over with very strong ideals, a very tough politician named Teddy Roosevelt, who was willing to stand up to what he called the corporations and the malefactors of great wealth. Even with antitrust laws and a new vigor to restore democracy, The moneyed interests continued to work behind the scenes and established the Federal Reserve in 1913. From that time on, the secret families that control corporations and government officials have only grown stronger. This must change. It is time for us as Americans to use the tools of representative democracy to implement the restoration of clear-cut principles of our constitutions. Solutions will be set forth in the final section of this book.